The first sound wasn't the slap. It was the sharp click of the exam room door sealing the argument inside St. Anselm Medical Center's maternity wing, 3rd floor, Bangkok. Then the slap. Flat, shocking, wrong, stole the oxygen from the room. Mara's cheek flared. The fetal monitor hiccuped. Adrian's eyes widened as if the hand weren't his. A nurse gasped. Someone whispered for security, and the fluorescent light turned every flaw merciless. The door burst open. A woman in a linen suit, silver hair swept into a pin, stood there like a punctuation mark ending an ugly sentence. "Adrian," she said, "what have you done?" Before we begin, take a moment and comment your city below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from around the world. Now, let's dive in. The night before the hospital, Bangkok hung in the windows like a restless galaxy. From the 40th floor of the Bel Ratanakosin, the Chao Phraya carved a dark ribbon across the city, and the lights blinked like impatient red eyes on the expressway. To everyone else, the apartment was breathtaking. Glass, stone, an indoor orange tree that never shed a leaf. To Mara, it occasionally felt like a well-designed aquarium. She on one side, Adrian swimming on the other, both visible and unable to reach. He was the founder of Skybridge, the payment startup that made foreign transaction fees vanish like a magician's scarf trick. His face, clean-cut, relentless, lived on magazine covers and CNBC lower thirds. He was 37, a millionaire many times over, and had learned to speak in forward motion, growth, runway, Series D, pre-IPO. Mara, 31, used to be a reporter. She still felt the cadence of interviews in her bones, questions stacking like dominoes, one knock setting the whole story in motion. Since the pregnancy, and the relocation from Singapore to Bangkok for Skybridge's regional expansion, she freelanced in corners of time. Short features, quieter profiles. She was 32 weeks along, careful with stares, unsteady around the smell of fish sauce, steady around everything else. They met 4 years earlier at a panel in Singapore, the unromantic fluorescent glow of a conference ballroom circling them into the same orbit. He talked about frictionless payments. She asked about invisible costs. He laughed afterward and asked her to coffee. She said no, then said yes a week later. They were married in a narrow garden in Tiong Bahru, under paper lanterns. His mother, Yoonji Park, who introduced herself as Grace, flew in from Seoul, shook everyone's hands, and gave Mara a lacquered jewelry box. Adrian's father was absent, and no one mentioned him. Sometimes Mara wondered if she'd noticed the first hairline crack in the ice that first year, or whether it formed later, imperceptible until it cleaved. Adrian could be thoughtful. Planned breakfasts, private drivers when she felt morning sick, a sofa that didn't press on her tailbone. But care, with him, sat close to control. He wanted to handle things. He wanted to optimize. When a doctor's receptionist put them on hold, he offered to get someone from Skybridge to speed it up. The day of the hospital, Mara felt a tightening like a zipper pulled from the inside. Not labor, she thought, surely not. But not nothing. She breathed, counted, timed. Adrian hovered, phone in hand. The call that night was with New York. A big investor was nervous about governance noise. Adrian insisted the IPO could still float this year if everyone stopped playing cautious. "I need to be checked," she said, hand at the small of her back. "Just to be safe." "We'll go," he said, without looking up. "Driver will be here in 9 minutes." The car slid through ribbons of traffic and into St. Anselm's portico, where a woman in a navy polo asked how far along she was and led them up neon-bright corridors, past posters with smiling newborns and nurses who walked like purposeful birds. In the exam room, the fetal monitor found a galloping heartbeat. Mara felt relief crack her chest open. The doctor wanted blood pressure readings and a quick ultrasound. Adrian's phone vibrated again. He stepped into the hallway to take the call. When he returned, his jaw was a line that could cut glass. "Who did you talk to?" he asked, voice low. "Who did you send your draft to?" "What draft?" she said, although she knew. The profile she was writing, careful, fair, about Southeast Asia's cashless transformations. It mentioned Skybridge's regulatory tangles without accusation, because accuracy is less dramatic than conspiracy. She hadn't sent a word to publication. "Don't play games." He had been tense for weeks after a CFO resignation to pursue opportunities. The timing smelled wrong. She'd asked him if he was okay. He'd said he didn't need a therapist. He needed results. "Adrian," she said, level as a floor, "we are in a hospital." "Exactly." He smiled without humor. "A great setting for sympathy PR." It was the first time she thought, "He doesn't see me." The monitor beeped with the steady drumming of their child. The nurse checked numbers. The air got thinner. "Stop," she said. "Please. What did you do?" His fingers flexed like he was trying to crush something that wouldn't stop moving. What she did was tell the truth, eventually. She'd interviewed a former compliance officer who hinted, only hinted, that Skybridge treated red flags like confetti to be swept up later. What she didn't do was leak confidential information, because she didn't have any. But his mind was racing down a different track entirely, greased by fear. "What did you do?" he asked again. And he moved before he thought. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't a hit that broke a bone or bled. It was a slap. Sharp, ugly, the sound of a hand against a face. The kind you could call impulsive in a press statement. The kind you could describe as out of character if you wanted the world to forget. The kind that hurts in ways we don't have words for. The door opened, and Grace walked in. Grace's driver had been circling the hospital when her phone vibrated with a call from a nurse she knew through a temple friend. Grace kept a social map of cities in her head. She had a way of knowing where to stand when the elevator doors opened. She didn't spy. She witnessed. When she stepped into the room, she saw everything at once. Her son's hand still lifted, the mark rising on Mara's cheek, the way Mara's other hand covered her belly like a prayer. Grace's face didn't move, but the hand holding her handbag trembled imperceptibly. "Nurse," Grace said in Thai, voice calm, "please call security." Then to Adrian in Korean, the language that wrapped him like a childhood blanket and still had the power to pinch. "Put your hand down." He did, like a boy caught stealing. His eyes flashed not with remorse, not yet, but with humiliation. He hated his mother seeing him lose control, because control was the currency he believed bought safety. The nurse, Knock, pressed a blue badge and spoke into her radio. Within seconds, the hall filled with a presence that changed the air. 2 security officers, a charge nurse, a resident with furrowed brow. People in hospitals learn how to move as a pack, protective, efficient, quietly judgmental. Mara, sitting on the bed paper crackle, stared not at Adrian or Grace, but at the monitor's green line that rose and fell like a tide. "Sir," one officer said, "we need you to step out." Adrian's mouth opened, words forming around the shape of apology and excuse and outrage. Grace put a hand lightly on his sleeve. "Don't speak," she said. He looked at her. He had never disobeyed that voice. He stepped back, the click of his shoes loud in the room's hard brightness. The door closed. The hallway swallowed him. Grace turned to Mara, and now her face softened with a gravity that felt like weather. Approaching, inevitable. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Mara shook her head, then nodded, then couldn't tell. The nurse placed a cold pack gently against her cheek, explained calmly that a social worker would come, that the fetal heart rate was steady, that someone would document, that someone would listen. Someone. For once, Grace pulled a chair close, unbuttoned her linen blazer like she meant to stay. For a woman whose photographs lived on the business pages, only sometimes, always in the shadow of her son, she didn't look like money. She looked like someone who ironed her own shirts until 2 years ago, someone who learned early that elegance was often just quiet. "I shouldn't have come uninvited," Grace said softly. "But I am here." Mara's throat ached. She didn't cry. The baby kicked. She felt protective in a way that had teeth. Grace's gaze flicked to the door. "He will not come back in," she said, as if she could order the world into compliance and make it stick. "Not unless you tell them he can." "You can't control him," Mara said, and it sounded like cruelty, but wasn't. Grace's mouth curved, humorless and small. "I know." Her eyes slid somewhere else, years ago. "I once thought I could." A social worker arrived, introduced herself as Rachanok, but said to call her Nok, like the nurse. She gave Mara choices like stepping stones. "Would you like to make a report? We can call the police. We can file an incident note. We can make a safety plan for when you leave." Everything felt unreal. The words landed like beads that would later string into something usable. For now, Mara said yes to documentation, yes to the note in the record, yes to a safety plan. No to police, for now. She wasn't protecting him. She was protecting herself from decisions that would define entire chapters before she'd finished this paragraph. Grace watched without hovering. Once, she touched Mara's wrist lightly, the way people did when they pass a cup. Careful not to drop. Careful not to spill. Through the wall, they could hear footsteps, a cough, the hush of tired people. The city kept breathing, uncaring and fully alive. In the hallway, Adrian stood with his back against the window, the lights of Bangkok burning holes in his reflection. He looked at his hand, as if it were a foreign animal. Shame arrived late. It always did with him, after logic, after the rearranging of narrative. He tried to tell himself, pressure, provocation, the fear of everything collapsing. But underneath his practiced sentences, a boy's voice said a simpler thing. "You did this." Grace stepped out briefly and found him. She didn't touch him. "I will arrange for a car," she said. "You will not return home tonight. I live there," he said, and the petulance in his voice startled even him. "You live where you are allowed," she replied, not unkind, "and where you have earned it." He looked at the floor. The tiles were very clean. "There are consequences," Grace said, each syllable measured. "I will stand with your wife, not with you, not now." Something in him wanted to rage, to list everything he had provided and built, to accuse her of disloyalty. Another thing in him, the more fragile one, wanted to fold into her like he was 6 and had skinned his knee. Instead, he nodded. He texted his assistant to book a suite at a serviced residence across the river. He typed urgent and privacy, the words men used when they wanted rooms that no one could find. He left the hospital through a side door, cap pulled low, mask on, a man who had trained for invisibility when visibility became too expensive. Back in the room, Grace held a cup of ice water and did not give advice. It was the first gift anyone had given Mara in hours that didn't ask anything in return. St. Anselm stacked its forms like thin shields. The social worker returned with a small clipboard and a larger compassion. The nurse repositioned the monitor and warmed the ultrasound gel in her palm, because cold, right now, felt like insult. The doctor measured amniotic fluid and called it reassuring. The paperwork asked when, where, who, how. There were boxes for witness and injury noted, redness to left cheek. Language so clean it made the mess feel like Mara had imagined it. Grace signed her name as witness. Her signature looped neatly, an old-fashioned confidence. She had been a secretary once, in a real estate office in Busan, long before she owned apartments like the ones she used to photocopy contracts for. The past is a story we file in a drawer we rarely open. Tonight, the drawer stuck and slid back out. "May I speak with you?" Grace asked quietly when the room finally emptied. "Without asking anything from you?" Mara turned her head, the cold pack now lukewarm. "Yes. I should have told you things before," Grace said. "I was afraid you would think less of us. Or more accurately, less of me, because I didn't stop what should have been stopped." "The past," Mara said, "doesn't change this." "No," Grace agreed. "But maybe it explains him in a way that doesn't excuse him." Grace told a story with the flat efficiency of someone used to delivering facts without decorative ribbon. She had married young. Her husband, Adrian's father, could be charming with an audience and corrosive in private. When she was pregnant, he hit her once in a kitchen full of stainless steel. Once, in a car at a red light. After Adrian was born, his father's violence turned verbal, then financial, the way cruelty changes tactics when one method stops delivering satisfaction. "He loved Adrian," Grace said, a sentence that carried more contradictions than one line should hold. "But he taught him that fear is a discipline, that control is love in proper uniform." "Where is he now?" Mara asked. "Dead," Grace said simply. "Heart attack, 7 years ago." The memory looked like relief and grief stitched with uneven thread. "I raised my son to never be his father," Grace continued. "I thought I had. But I raised him also to be invulnerable because I believed that would keep him safe. I see now how invulnerability can make a man cruel and call it focus." Mara stared at the monitor's green hill and valley, at the cheap painting of lilies on the wall, at the crack in the ceiling above the fluorescent panel. She didn't want context. She wanted a time machine. Barring that, she wanted a door. Grace held her silence like a bowl. "I will support whatever you decide. If you report him to the police, I will go with you. If you file for a restraining order, I will drive you. If you leave and take nothing, you will not, in fact, have nothing." That snapped Mara's attention back. "What does that mean?" "I made mistakes," Grace said. "One I did not make was leaving the power only with my son. The Bell Ratanakosin apartment is in a trust. Part of it is yours. I insisted before the wedding. Post-nuptial, after he balked at a prenup. He signed. He did not tell you because he wanted you to feel grateful. My mistake." Mara exhaled, a noise between disbelief and a laugh that forgot how to be a laugh. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because safety," Grace said gently, "requires facts." It was a complicated kindness, the kind that felt both like a gift and a confession. It introduced a power shift into a room already spinning. Mara felt steadier and more adrift, both. "Why did you come to the hospital?" Mara asked, another question that had been scratching at the door. Grace looked, finally, like she might break. "Because a woman I once promised I would protect did not get protected," she said. "I have not stopped failing her. I thought, foolishly, that maybe I could stop failing you." The nurse came back with discharge forms and instructions about rest and magnesium and avoiding stress. Advice whose vagueness made Mara want to laugh and then sleep for a week. They scheduled a follow-up for Tuesday. Grace arranged for a separate car to take Mara to a hotel under her own name, a downtown place with velvet chairs and discreet staff. "Just for tonight," Grace said, "or for longer. You will decide." Mara packed her overnight bag in silence. A woman from housekeeping smiled at her with professional warmth that felt like human light. In the elevator, Grace pressed the button with the flat of her knuckle. Neither of them looked at the security mirror. Bangkok outside pulsed on schedule. Street vendors poured broth. Motorbikes threaded the inevitable traffic. A teenage couple shared a Coke on a curb, their knees touching like a secret. The world kept humiliatingly going, and that, too, was a kind of consolation. Mara slept at the hotel as if her body had been unplugged. She woke to messages. 2 from the obstetrician, 1 from the social worker checking in, 12 from unknown numbers, and 1 from Adrian. A text that read simply, "I'm sorry, please, can we talk?" She didn't reply. Not yet. She looked at her cheek in the bathroom mirror. The redness was a faded handprint that made her skin look like it belonged to someone else. Her stomach moved as the baby shifted, as if pushing for room. She opened her laptop, then closed it. She opened it again. The draft of her profile on cashless Southeast Asia sat in the center of her desktop, like a dog waiting to be fed. She read the paragraph that mentioned Skybridge's regulatory warning in Vietnam, the not yet public inquiry in Malaysia. The sentences were careful. The sentences were true. But she understood how a man cornered by his own fear would read them as betrayal. She also understood, slowly, as coffee cut the fog, that fear was rarely alone. It brought friends, pride, secrecy, the thrill of not being caught. Her phone buzzed. A message from a number with a UK code. Rena here. Can we talk? Rena had been the CFO for 4 years, a whip-smart woman who wore tailored suits and exactly one ring. She left Skybridge abruptly last month, citing a values misalignment, a phrase that belongs in corporate bingo and divorces. Mara had interviewed her once in a group setting. Rena's gaze made you feel seen and measured. Mara texted back, "Now?" Rena called, and the line carried the grainy quality of distance. "Are you safe?" Rena asked first. Mara said yes. "I'm sorry," Rena said, meaning it. "I left because I found something I couldn't correct without blowing the whole board up. I was in over my head and also out of patience." "What did you find?" Mara asked. "Nothing that should surprise anyone," Rena said. "Revenue recognition games, pushing compliance to tomorrow, risk modeled like a horoscope, whatever you need it to be. I raised the alarm. Adrian accused me of disloyalty. We used to be on the same side. Then, suddenly, we weren't." Mara imagined Adrian hearing this and feeling his skin peel back. The particular pain of being called a fraud when your entire personality is built on being the fix. She felt a flicker of something not quite sympathy. Recognition, maybe. The problem with smart men is that they think they can outrun gravity. "This isn't your burden," Rena said, voice gentler. "But it will be in the papers. If you think your draft precipitated this, it didn't. The board hired an outside firm. These things roll downhill until they find the people at the bottom. Don't stand there if you can help it." They said goodbye like women who might one day be friends if they'd met under different weather. Mara sat a long time, her laptop glow steady on the duvet's blue. Grace texted, asking if she could come by. Mara said yes, not out of obligation, but because the thought of Grace sitting in a chair across the room felt newly human. Grace arrived with kanji from a place that did ginger right. She placed it on the table like an offering to whatever gods manage small mercies. "I spoke to a lawyer," Grace said, adjusting a cuff. "Not your husband's. The word yours belongs to you today. If you choose to file for a protective order, you can. If you choose not to, you can. Your options exist regardless of his remorse." "What do you want me to do?" Mara asked, because it was easier to hand someone the steering wheel than to keep holding it with shaking hands. "I want you to be safe," Grace said, "and I want my son to face himself. Those two desires do not always align. If forced to choose, I choose you and the baby." Mara's throat tightened. "He'll say it was one time." Grace's face did something complicated. "It was one time that you will allow," she said. It was not one time that he felt the urge. There were 10,000 almosts pressed against that moment. They ate quietly. The kanji warmed something cold. Mara found herself telling Grace a story from her childhood, how her mother, Anjana, taught her to set the table with the spoons facing in, as if the table had teeth. How plates were stacked efficiently for washing to save water. How her father laughed too loudly at movies and cried secretly at cricket matches. The telling felt like building a bridge to a safer shore. In the afternoon, the social worker called again. "You're not alone," she said. "If you decide to go home to collect things, We can arrange an escort, or we can send someone on your behalf. The bureaucracy of care, forms, escorts, timetables, felt both clumsy and miraculous. Mara decided to go. Not to reclaim the apartment as hers. That would require a war she wasn't ready to wage, but to take what she needed. Clothing, the soft cotton onesies she'd spent too long choosing, the journal where she'd written to a baby who felt, suddenly, like the only uncomplicated truth left. Grace insisted on coming. She insisted the driver wait in the basement garage rather than in the circle where the concierge could see. She insisted on the small things that had always saved her life. The quiet entrances and exits, the details that keep you from becoming a spectacle. Upstairs, the apartment was both exactly and not at all as Mara remembered. The indoor orange tree had dropped 5 glossy leaves. The city lay beyond, unchanged and impossible. In the bedroom, she took a breath, felt the cheap ache of grief. It was not grief for the man he had become. It was grief for the rooms she had furnished with a future that now looked like someone else's IKEA bookshelf. Functional, impersonal. She was zipping a suitcase when the door opened and closed with the soft thud of the hand that knows the door. Adrian stood there, thinner than yesterday somehow, mask of a man who hadn't slept. "We need to talk," he said. Grace stepped from the hallway shadow like a quiet bodyguard. "No," she said. "You need to listen. There is a way to apologize that is actually pleading for exoneration. And there is a way to apologize that is a receipt for harm done." Adrian had rehearsed the first. He abandoned it when he saw Grace's eyes. He tried to manufacture the second. It came out splintered. "I am sorry," he said, voice tight with unshed panic. "I am sorry I hurt you, Mara. There is no excuse. I have no explanation that matters. I lost control. I was afraid and angry and—" "Stop there," Grace said. "You are listing feelings like evidence." He swallowed. "I am asking for forgiveness." "You are asking for relief," she said. "Different product." Mara stood very still. She had imagined in the night what she would say if this moment arrived. "I trusted you. You broke it. You don't get to call this love." She had imagined saying nothing, letting silence do the work of 1,000 litigations. Now, in the bright afternoon, she did neither. "What are you afraid of?" she asked instead. He blinked, wrong-footed. "Losing everything." "You might," Grace said, "and still not die." He looked at the window, then at his hands. He had built an empire by making risk look like an equation. Now his life felt like a variable he couldn't solve for. "Rena," he began and stopped. He couldn't decide whether to blame or confess. "Rena called me," Mara said. "She told me what she found." He closed his eyes. Relief flickered. Someone had said it out loud, and the world hadn't ended. Then fear returned, doubling down, as it always does. "It's not fraud," he said quickly, which is what men say when they are standing near a cliff. "It's aggressive accounting. Everyone does it." Grace made a small sound that was not laughter. "When your father lied," she said, "he used the same verbs. It is a family grammar." "I am not him," Adrian said, the words cracking. "Then be not him," Grace replied, simple as a recipe. "Start with today. Do not fight for your image. Fight for your soul." The word soul sounded theatrical in the sleek apartment, and yet it fit. We use old words when the new ones break. "I spoke to a lawyer," Mara said, voice steady. "I am filing for a protective order. I don't know what I am doing about us, not yet. I know what I am doing about me and the baby, protecting." He nodded. Somewhere in him, a man with good instincts applauded. Another man sulked. They stared at each other for a long time, like two people on either side of a glass wall. "Do you want me at the birth?" he asked, a question dragging tears behind it. "I want safety at the birth," she said. "What that looks like will depend on how you behave before then." "I will do anything," he said, which is what men say when they want the world to reset. Therapy. Resign as CEO if the board asks. Make amends. "Don't promise like a CEO," Grace said. "Promise like a man whose words cost him." He left without touching anything, as if the apartment were a museum of his own mistakes. After the door shut, Mara sat on the bed and felt her body shaking with the adrenaline she had mistaken for strength. Grace sat beside her, not touching, their shoulders almost, but not quite, aligned. In the following days, the machinery of consequence started its humid grind. The board announced a comprehensive review. Headlines used the word turbulence, a polite way of saying blood in the water. Rena's quiet dignity looked good on camera. Adrian's absence looked worse. He issued a statement that was both too much and not enough, apologizing to employees for distraction, to customers for concern, saying nothing about the hospital because the legal team said saying nothing was better than saying something that could be evidence. He started therapy with a Thai-Korean psychologist named Dr. Sung, who spoke softly and asked hard questions. In the first session, Adrian talked for 40 minutes without breathing, and then Dr. Sung said, "When did you first learn that losing control meant dying?" Adrian saw the kitchen tile in his childhood apartment and the red light at the intersection where his father's ring left a bruise on his mother's wrist. He said, "I was 6, and surprised himself by crying in a way that was not performative or useful, just feral. Mara met with the lawyer again, signed a stack of documents that had her name on them in ways that made her feel both powerful and small. The protective order was granted temporarily, with a review in 3 weeks. It made her feel safer, and also like she was living a story she had promised herself she would never audition for. "I hate this," she told Grace, who nodded, because honesty does not always require commentary. At night, Mara wrote in the journal to the baby. She wrote like she used to interview, simple questions and cleaner answers. "Today you kicked when I said your name. Today I ate mango and felt, briefly, that sweetness could fix anything. Today your father apologized badly and then a little better. Today I chose us." She did not write that she sometimes missed the man who had carried her shoes when her ankles swelled, who had memorized 3 lullabies in languages he didn't speak. She did not write that missing the good did not cancel the harm. We are capable of holding both, but it is hard to look at our hands when they are full. Courtrooms smell like paper and old wood. The family court in Bangkok added the faint tang of disinfectant, a cleanliness that felt ironic. Mara sat with her lawyer on a bench and tried to breathe like the app suggested. Grace sat on her other side, her presence a long, steady line on a heart monitor. Adrian arrived with his counsel, face pale. He looked at Mara only once, then looked away as if the light burned. The judge, a woman with hair pinned back so severely it looked like an opinion, read the case file with the kind of boredom that hides rigor. She asked questions. Few. Precise. "Do you dispute the incident?" she asked Adrian. "No," he said. The protective order was extended for 6 months, with exceptions for supervised medical appointments and the birth plan as agreed by both parties and the hospital. It felt like a bureaucratic victory and an existential defeat simultaneously. Outside, cameras waited. Hungry. Grace placed a hand briefly on Mara's elbow, guiding her away from the main doors. In the side street, a stray dog slept in a rectangle of shade. The city pressed its palm against the day and whispered, "Carry on." Meanwhile, in Skybridge conference rooms with expensive water, the board met. The outside audit firm presented slides that said what slides always say. We normalized, we benchmarked, we found deviations. The deviations had names and dates. The board chair, a woman with a voice like a level, said the phrase no founder wants to hear. For the good of the company. Adrian offered to step aside, temporarily. The board made it permanent. He left with a severance package he did not deserve, and had negotiated for himself years ago when he believed in his own invincibility. He walked out of the building past the logo he had designed in a coffee shop 8 years earlier. Now it looked like a sign for a store that had moved to another mall. He wanted to smash something, and also to lie on the floor. He did neither. He went to therapy. The story took on its media shape. Founder resigns amid governance review. The hospital incident didn't appear in print, though the whispers bled through the industry. Grace kept her phone on silent. Friends called to say the things friends say. Enemies called to say nothing. They just wanted to hear how her voice sounded when it was hurt. Mara moved into a smaller apartment with good light and a balcony where a smart plant would not die. She bought a kettle that whistled because she liked being warned before things boiled. She organized baby clothes into drawers labeled with masking tape, a ritual of control that felt benign and earned. At a follow-up appointment, the obstetrician smiled at the monitor. "She's strong," the doctor said. It felt like a benediction. They discussed induction dates because of Mara's blood pressure. Mara asked about who could be in the room. The doctor looked at the chart, at the protective order, at Mara's face. "We can make a plan," she said, and the phrase sounded like safety. In a quiet moment, Grace told Mara a secret about money. "It can buy apologies," she said, "but not amends." She explained the difference without sermon. Apologies are words you purchase because they can be returned if the receiver doesn't like the fit. Amends are tailored and non-refundable. "And expensive," Mara said. "The price," Grace replied, "is the point." They scheduled the induction for a Monday, a date that felt both arbitrary and fated. The hospital wrote down who would be present: the doctor, a midwife, a nurse, a social worker who volunteered for difficult cases because she believed in small interventions like pressure on a lower back. Grace would be there. Adrian would wait in a separate room with a glass wall like penance. He could come in only if Mara said yes at the time. The plan was a living document, they reminded everyone, because birth and peace do not always obey forms. On Sunday night, Bangkok thundered until the windows vibrated. Mara lay awake, watching the lightning strobe the ceiling. She thought of all the women who had pushed babies into the world with no plan, with too much plan, with plans interrupted by life, men, weather. She placed a hand on her belly and whispered a promise she would keep. "I will keep you safe from meanness. I will try." Grace sat in her apartment reading a book she did not absorb. She had placed the lacquered jewelry box on the coffee table. Inside, the jade pendant she had never worn. She thought of her own mother, who had once said, "Women in our family survive." Grace wondered when survival would feel less like a championship and more like a day off. Adrian did not sleep. He watched the river move like a muscle. He wrote letters he didn't send, first to Mara, then to the daughter who was not yet here. He wrote, "When you are old enough to read this, I hope I am a man who deserves to sign my name." He attended his accountability group, a room of men who talked about anger like it was weather they had to learn to read. He sat in a circle of chairs and said, "I am not asking for a cookie for being here." One man nodded, grateful for that sentence. At the hospital, morning came with coffee and urgency. The IV clicked. The world shrank to a room and inflated to a universe. The midwife, a woman with crow's feet that looked like she laughed often, helped Mara find positions that honored the stubbornness of bodies. Grace counted quietly, her voice a metronome. The social worker pressed on Mara's sacrum. Time lost its minutes. It remembered its contractions. In the waiting room, Adrian paced. The glass wall made him feel like a fish, correctly. He could see the door to Mara's room, could see Grace's silhouette. He pressed his palm to the cool surface, and imagined, for a self-indulgent second, that this was his punishment. Then he let the thought go, because self-indulgent punishments make for dramatic television, and real boring amends live in grocery aisles and small rooms with crying babies. Hours later, when the doctor said it was time, when the world narrowed to a fundamental task and widened to include a new person, Mara looked at Grace. Grace nodded. Mara looked at the door. The nurse understood. She opened it. Adrian entered quietly, as if the air might refuse him. He stood at the head of the bed, not touching, hands visible, as if approaching a skittish animal. He said nothing. The midwife told him where to stand. He stood there. Mara bore down with a sound that had no place in polite life. The room organized itself around her effort. The world did the thing it had done 1 billion times, and still felt like a miracle. When the baby slid free and cried, stunned by cold, the doctor placed her on Mara's chest. Skin on skin. A slick, furious, perfect human with a mouth like a new moon. Mara cried. Grace cried. Adrian cried silently, as if a sound might shatter the fragile peace. "What's her name?" the nurse asked. Mara and Adrian looked at each other as if they had been practicing for this. "Anaya," Mara said. "It means cared for." The nurse wrote it down on a bracelet and fastened it snugly around a tiny wrist. The ink looked both too bold and exactly right. Adrian did not reach to touch. He asked permission like a man learning to walk. "May I?" he said, and Mara, tired to her bones, said, "Yes." For 1 minute, he placed a finger on Anaya's foot, an anchoring point the size of a blueberry. He said nothing. The minute passed. He stepped back. Sometimes redemption starts with the simplest of boundaries honored. The weeks after birth folded into each other like laundry someone promised to put away. Sleep came in bargains. Anaya latched like a champion, and then, some days, like a protester. The world contained burp cloths, bottle sterilizers, lactation consultants, and the precise pleasure of clipping tiny nails without nicking skin. Mara's body ached and healed. She cried at laundry commercials and when the kettle whistled. She laughed at 2 a.m. once, helplessly, because the baby hiccuped in rhythm with the ceiling fan. Grace established a routine of errands that made life look gentler. Groceries, managing delivery men who always arrived during naps, a 3-hour window every afternoon when she took Anaya for a walk in the courtyard so Mara could sleep. "This," Grace said, "is the luxury money can't buy. A woman who loves you and has time." Adrian kept every boundary like a line he could finally respect. Supervised visits, no unannounced drop-ins, texts that asked rather than demanded. He went to therapy twice a week and to the accountability group without posting about it. He sold shares to set up a fund for domestic violence shelters, and then shut up about it when a reporter asked for a quote. "If I speak," he told Dr. Sung, "isn't that performative?" Dr. Sung said, "Intent matters. So does silence. Choose the one that costs you more." He wrote letters to Anaya he still didn't send. He wrote one he read aloud once, in the court-monitored visitation room with the unflattering lighting and the toy kitchen with a missing pot. He didn't theatrically cry. He swallowed often. "I did harm," he said, words like gravel. "I am doing work to not be that man again. When you can understand, I will show you what I did to fix myself, not you." Mara watched. Not in a cruel way, not in a longing way. In a journalist's way, perhaps, noting patterns, tracking repetition, open to being surprised, unwilling to be convinced by a single anecdote. She wrote more in her journal. She wrote less about Adrian. She wrote about herself in the plural. "We are tired. We took a 20-minute shower. We kept a baby alive." Grace told Mara things she hadn't told anyone, not even herself in complete sentences. The day she hid money in the hem of a curtain. The day she decided to stop waiting for a version of her husband who did not exist. The day she forgave herself for not leaving earlier. Not absolved, just stopped bleeding guilt every time she remembered. "I have been both complicit and brave," she said. "Most of us are, if we are honest." The protective order remained a fact of life, like the weather report you always check before leaving. The review date approached. The lawyer asked if Mara wanted to extend. "What do you want?" Grace asked. Mara held Anaya and felt the sturdiness of her tiny spine. "I want to keep the door unlocked," she said, "but not open." At the review, Mara told the judge the truth. That Adrian had honored the order, that he was doing work, that she was not ready to drop the boundary, but was okay with modifying it for co-parenting logistics. The judge nodded at a woman who had learned to set the spoons facing inward, at a man who had learned to stop reaching without asking. The years ahead looked like a slow climb rather than a swooning reconciliation. Friends who wanted a neat ending, they got back together. Or she moved on with a poet, would have to find their dopamine someplace else. The truth was quieter. 2 apartments, 5 stations apart, a shared calendar, a child who loved trains and mango and both of her parents. On a rainy Thursday, 3 months after the birth, Adrian came to assemble a bookshelf in Mara's living room. He asked where to put it. "There," she said, pointing to a wall that would catch morning light. He pulled out an Allen key and worked like someone who had decided the performance of penance was less useful than the practice of usefulness. When he left, he stood at the door, hands in pockets so she could see them. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me in, for not humiliating me in front of the delivery guy, for not giving up on the version of me I am trying to earn." He didn't list the thanks. He left them implied. Mara closed the door and leaned her forehead against it for a second. Not romantic, just tired. She went back to Anaya's playmat and sat cross-legged on the floor. The baby grabbed her finger with astonishing conviction. "We are okay," Mara said aloud. Not as a claim, but as a practice. 2 years later, the city felt both smaller and full of new corridors. Anaya talked like a tiny lawyer, her sentences precise. "Appa, you forgot my bear. Mama, rain is loud. Halmione, mango now." She had Adrian's eyes and Mara's stubborn chin, Grace's way of arranging bowls on the table with unexamined competence. She flung open the future with toddler certainty. Adrian had not returned to a CEO desk. He taught a seminar on ethics in fintech at a university that paid him little and cost him pride in ways he found instructive. He invested quietly in women-led startups and did not sit on their boards. He chaired the foundation he'd seeded, and the meetings were boring, which is how you know a foundation is doing the unglamorous work. Mara returned to writing with a voice that had lowered a register. Not in sadness, but in authority. She wrote about ordinary acts of courage. She wrote profiles that lived in the small margins where most of our lives unfold. She did not write about Skybridge. She wrote about a woman who left a marriage and opened a noodle stall that fed night shift nurses. It went viral not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. Grace planted herbs on her balcony, pinched the basil to keep it from bolting, learned to nap. She laughed more, and when she thought of her late husband, her mouth no longer tightened like a fist. She still ironed her shirts, but not all of them. On Anaya's 2nd birthday, they met at a little party room in the condo's community center. 2 chairs by the window, one for Mara, one for Adrian. A cake with too much frosting. A banner that said "to" like a command. They sang, off-key and fully. Anaya clapped for herself because, of course, Grace cut slices with fair distribution that would have impressed a judge. After gifts, after the ritual of trash bags and thank yous, Mara and Adrian sat in the 2 chairs. They watched their daughter arrange toy animals in a line that made sense only to her. "Do you ever Adrian began, then stopped. He had learned to stop middles of sentences that asked for absolution. Sometimes, Mara said, answering the question he hadn't asked. I think about the version of us that never learned anything. They look shiny in photographs, but they break easily. I am grateful we broke, he said softly. It is expensive gratitude, but it is honest. She nodded. The afternoon light made the dust look like invisible facts finally visible. She looked at him and saw not the man who had slapped her. The alarm of that memory would always live in her body. But the man who had chosen, then and repeatedly, not to hide from what that meant. Thank you for the bookshelf, she said. It had become a joke between them, shorthand for unglamorous repair. He smiled, sheepish. 2 chairs, 1 room, a kid shouting, "Mango now," a mother humming in a kitchen down the hall. Not happy ever after. Just with work, okay? Out the window, the river kept moving. The city kept metabolizing light, and a storm gathered in the distance with the dignity of weather. The future would contain more storms. They would check the windows. They would move the plants inside. They would make soup. They would not pretend rain was not wet. If you're still here, if you held your breath with Mara in the hospital, if you watched Adrian learn the difference between apology and amends, if you felt Grace's quiet strength holding the edges, thank you. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a story about the long work of becoming decent, about boundaries that protect and love that changes shape instead of vanishing. Somewhere, someone you know is doing this work in rooms without cameras or applause. If this story gave you language for your own anger, your own hope, or your own next step, I'm honored for more stories that take their time, that let characters be complicated and real. Please like, share, and subscribe. It helps this channel keep telling truths that don't fit into headlines. And if you need help today, reach out to a friend, a hotline, a stranger who knows what paperwork matters. Healing isn't cinematic. It's daily, and it's possible.